Can you talk about Cheikh Anta Diop and your relationship and the mind of Cheikh Anta Diop?
Yes, I would be honored to. Um, I was a student after graduating from Denver University. I got accepted in a doctoral program at Rutgers University, and quite honestly, I got accepted into that program, but I really didn't see how I could take a PhD in chemistry and find my place in the universe. I knew that there was something missing, and I had a friend who's a doctor now. He lives in Brooklyn, New York, and he had gone to Cornell undergraduate school. And he had a book that he let me borrow, and the title of that book was The African Origin of Civilization, Myth or Reality. When I began to read that book, I became so engrossed I couldn't put it down. And when I completed reading that book, I knew I had to leave Rutgers, and I knew I had to go to Africa to meet Cheikh Anta Diop, who we call Diop. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I left Rutgers and I went back to Denver, and I was studying at the University of Colorado, and then all of a sudden I heard that there was a trip to go to West Africa. And when I began to explore the trip, it was a study abroad trip, and then I found out that there was going to be a study abroad trip, and part of the trip would be at the University of Dakar at that time. And we had the opportunity, or we were going to have the opportunity to meet Cheikh Anta Diop, who you know as Diop. And this was an epic moment for me because Cheikh Anta Diop, many people have considered Cheikh Anta Diop to be the greatest intellectual historian since the great historian Ibn Khaldun. But not only was Cheikh Anta Diop a historian, but he was a mathematician, he was a physicist, he was a chemist, he was an anthropologist, he was a linguist, not just a linguist, but he was a hyper polyglot, a politician as well. So he was what we call an antifari in Wolof. I think that means Pharaoh, all right? And this meeting Cheikh Anta in 1979 at his C14 laboratory at the University of Dakar. He gave a lecture which lasted for 5 hours. And the title of that lecture was The Peopling of Ancient Egypt and the Decipherment of the Moretic Script. And this lecture was based on a symposium that he had given at the University of Dakar in 1974. At a subsequent conference in 1973 in Paris, France, he had asked UNESCO to sponsor a colloquium where only scholars who were specialists in Egyptology, anthropology, prehistoric archaeology would convene at the University of Cairo, and they would exchange intellectual ideas, scientific evidence to see who the ancient Egyptians were. There were scholars from America, from France, from England, from Canada, Australia, and Dr. Diop took with him a group of African scholars who had direct knowledge of pharaonic Egypt, as you know, we call Kemet today. And among those scholars were Dr. Theophile Obinga. You perhaps remember Dr. Obinga. He taught at Temple University and later at the University of San Francisco. He's a Congolese. He's a historian, he's a linguist, and he is a philosopher. This conference lasted for 10 days, 7 in the morning to 11 at night. And at the conclusion of the conference, the scholars could not agree. But there was a doctor, and his name is Dr. Samaron. He was the director of Oriental Studies at the University of Cairo. I recently saw a publication by him that I had been looking for a number of years, and now I found it. He agreed with Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop and those African scholars, and he was subsequently removed from his position. You see, there was a specific effort to try to undermine the works of Cheikh Anta and Dr. Obing and those other African scholars who were at that colloquium in Egypt. And when I had an opportunity to meet Cheikh Anta, I asked him, because I read the transcripts. And I asked him, you know, I was very young and very emotional, you might say. I asked him, I said, why didn't you come out more adamant, and why didn't you come out and fight more? And he told me, he said that was not necessary. He said, the intellect that I provided was sufficient, because he knew that UNESCO had put those scholars up to try to undermine his work. But he knew that they didn't have the scientific knowledge or the required skill to undermine his work, you see. So he corrected me, and after that I was at ease. So to go back to your question, meeting Cheikh Anta, it was mesmerizing, because for me, he was like great black men like the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, like the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, and like some others. When he walked into a room, you know something else walked into the room with him. That's what the late James Baldwin said about the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. The first time he met the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, he said, when this little short, diminutive man walked into the room, something else walked in with him. That's how Cheikh Anta Diop was. And in his presence, I was totally inert. In fact, when I stood beside him to take a picture, that picture that I sent to you, and I have some others, I have to look through my archives to find them, because whenever you and I meet again, we should share that with the community so they can know about it. He grabbed me just to hug me, to embrace me. Like in French, they say, mon frère, my brother. You know what I mean? And I asked him a series of questions. And one of the questions that I wanted to ask him, and you need to share this with the community so they can understand it. I wanted to ask him if he was aware of the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. But since there were some white people in our study group, I felt that I should defer that question, because that's something I wanted to ask him in private, you know, and in confidence. So therefore, I changed the question, and I asked him if he knew of one of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad ardent students. His name is Dr. Freddie X. Thomas. He's from Buffalo. He was from Rochester, New York. There's a high school named after him in Rochester. He was a physician, he was a chemist, he was a mathematician, a historian, a musician. He too was a multidisciplinarian. And there's a Philadelphia historian by the name of James Spady, who used to teach at Cornell, okay? He wrote about Cheikh Anta Diop like in the 60s and the 70s, and at that time, he knew more about Cheikh Anta Diop than anybody in America, okay? I met James Spady, a friend of mine introduced me to him. This was way back in the early 1990s in New York, and we shared some very deep work, and I hope to get in contact with him. But Cheikh Anta answered that question for me, and when he said that he never had an opportunity to meet the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, but when I asked him about Freddie X. Thomas, in fact, there's a book recently came out on Dr. Freddie. It's called The Silent Leader, okay? Yeah, and he said that Cheikh Anta, I'm speaking of Cheikh Anta now, he said that in the future he would come to America because 3 universities had invited him to come to America. And one of those universities was City College. I was on a conference several years ago at African Echoes with Dr. What's his name? I'm forgetting his name right now. He taught, you know him too. He taught at City University, and they kind of gave him a lot of problems. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make, Dr. Jeffries, that's it. Yeah, it was Dr. Jeffries. Dr.
Leonard Jeffries.
Dr. Leonard Jeffries had invited Cheikh Anta to America, and there were 2 other to other schools that invited me. I never got a chance to know that, what universities they were. But Cheikh Anta, he told me, he said next year he would definitely come to America. That would have been 1980. But he didn't come into the year 1985 when I think Dr. Finch brought him to Morehouse College. And this was very interesting because I was coming from Texas A&M one summer. I was off from summer school, and I stopped in Columbia, South Carolina to see my mother, and I was watching MTV in South Carolina, and they had a picture of Cheikh Anta Diop there. He was being interviewed by Listerveld. He was from South Carolina, Listerveld Middleton. And Listerveld was interviewing him, and it almost blew my mind. So that next morning I went down to the radio station, and Listerveld brought to my attention that Dr. Diop had been in Atlanta University. And he gave a conference at Atlanta University. You might archive that to find out about it. And that conference was, I think, Dr. Andrew Young was instrumental in bringing him to Morehouse, because at that time, Andrew Young was the mayor of Atlanta, Georgia. But Dr. Finch, I think, was the catalyst behind bringing him here. Dr. Charles Finch. He was formerly on the medical faculty at Morehouse University. So now, all of these things, Cheikh Anta said that he wanted to reach out to the African American community because he said that he was certain that all of the major linguists and historians in the world are in Africa. In America. Because he said in America, because the African Americans were taken away from Africa, there's a urgency, a yearning for African Americans to know their ancestors. So in turn, I asked him, I said, I would like to come and study with you. He said, that would be great. And he directed me to the Office of Admissions and Records, but I never was able to fulfill that quest because when I got back to the States, shortly after, I had a tragedy in my family, and then Cheikh Anta died, So, but he gave me some very important keys, because among those keys, he taught me that the only thing that is important in the study of history is for one to know his or her ancestors. Because if you don't know your ancestors, cognitively, you become disconnected from who you are. And he taught that the cultural identity formation is made by three related factors: history, culture, science, and spirit. History, culture, science, and what was the other? History, language, and what was it? Psychology or psychic factor. And when those three factors come together, this is the basis to reconstruct cultural identity formation. And once you have cultural identity formation, you find out that history is the cultural cement to establish cultural identity formation.
What is Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop's legacy? What is he best known for? And how has his foundation been advanced by succeeding scholars?
The main thing that I think Cheikh Anta, his most decisive work, that he directed African people to look at Egypt, Kemet, in the way that European scholars look at Greece and Rome. You understand? And then once we come to know the history of Kemet, then we will know that both Greece and Rome, they too came to Egypt, and that's how they got their knowledge. You see, during a period known as the Hellenic period, that's when many scholars came to Egypt, to Kemet, to study. In fact, the first scholar who came to Egypt, his name was Thales. He's the one who's known for the four elements: earth, wind, fire, and rain. Okay? Actually, those are not elements, those are actually compounds, So you can see Greek knowledge was very truncated. It was very minuscule. They didn't have the full scope of Kemetic knowledge, you see? And so when Thales came to Kemet to study, he told Pythagoras about the wonders of Kemet. And then Pythagoras, he came to Egypt and he studied for 22 years. You see? And he came up with the Pythagorean theorem where c squared equals a squared plus b squared. Okay? That's the hypotenuse of a right triangle and the adjacent side is equal to c squared. That's precisely the pyramids of Giza, which existed 2,500 years even before the birth of Pythagoras. You see? So there was another scholar in Egypt. He's a historian. And this is a question I asked Cheikh Anta. I said, why do people try to say that Herodotus never came to Egypt? He said that was a pack of lies. He said Herodotus came to Egypt in 525 BC, okay? And that even though he was a Greek, and I don't know if some knowledge is coming out to say Herodotus may not have been a Greek, he may have been Phoenician, okay? Meaning Phoenician, that he came from Africa, you see? Because ancient Greece was first populated by Cadmus. These were Phoenicians, meaning they were black people who came from what is now called Northern Africa. But anyway, Dr. Diop said that Herodotus has been called the father of history, and he deserves every right to be called the father of history. Because although he was a Greek, he was honest enough to say it is from Egypt that the Greeks received their knowledge. You see what I'm saying? And then he said all of those pre-Socratic scholars, they came to Egypt and studied. Even when I was a young boy in the 10th grade, I remember we studied what we call Greek tragedy. That's when Socrates was supposed to have drank the hemlock, you know? And then when you go and see George G.M. James' Stolen Legacy, he explains why he drank the hemlock. You know, the Athenian government was accusing him of studying things beyond the heavens and beneath the earth. What is beyond the heavens? That's astronomy. What is beneath the earth? That's geology. These sciences were alien. They were alien to Greece and alien to Rome, you see. So all of that has been resolved. Egypt was black, black, black. Because by the time the Egyptians were building the civilization in ancient Egypt, there were neither white or yellow races existing in the world. It was all black. And if we want to use the word African, which we can deal with later, it was all African. And those Africans who were born all along the Great Lakes region, they migrated to the Nile Valley. And from there, they migrated into Asia, into Australia, into the South Pacific, populating China and India, okay? Even in the Americas, via the Bering Strait, all the way down from Alaska, all the way down into the west coast of California, into Meso and Central America, going into, Meso and Central America. It was a single humanity that began in Africa that populated the world. Now, however, it is anachronistic, outdated to say that African people are merely the first people of the earth. We are not just the first people of the earth, we are the first people of the universe. And now you and I, we must answer to that. And the only way we can answer that, and I think Cheikh Anta made that point when I was trying to ask him about if he knew the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. That knowledge is already with us now. We have the key to that. We have the key to the origin of the universe. You see, and that knowledge is it's embedded in us, not just in our DNA, but it's deep into the atoms that comprises the molecules of the DNA. You see, and embedded in our darkness, what we might call melanin, like the great Martinican psychiatrist Frantz Fanon. He says that when you're black, and only when you're black, you possess a cosmic effluvium. Okay, cosmic from the universe, effluvial, a flow that flows in the universe throughout nature. And that is what in science we call the electromagnetic spectrum, where E equals HV. You see, the energy of the earth is equal to a height times the velocity, you see, of the earth. And that's how you get momentum and speed. And so we have that. But now what we have to do as a people, we have to come back and we have to develop a collective personality. And in that collective personality is a unique and original inheritance. And we are the only people in the universe that have that.
What is a collective personality?
A collective personality really is first based on your history. Because remember, the history is the cement, okay? The glue that makes the people become a people. You see? And if you don't have a collective personality, you are not a people. You're just a population. You see? The absurdity of someone saying, I'm a Democrat and I'm a black. I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican. But neither one of these parties can solve our problems. You see what I mean? So when we have a collective personality, we know who we are because we know where we came from. And then we know where we're going. And then when we know those three things, that gives us self-knowledge. That's what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad called the knowledge of self. It's the greatest knowledge that an individual or people should have. So you have to have the identity formation to have the knowledge of self. You see? And when you get that, those two things, they mesh together, and that's how you get your collective personality.
What do you suppose, or what have you concluded that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Cheikh Anta Diop were striving towards or for?
Well, the main issue was for black people to come in to a sense of self. You know, both of those two men died on the battlefield, you might say, trying to resurrect our history, our culture. You see what I mean? Our science, okay? And because, listen carefully. See, when you have history, you first have to know your ancestors. And then from your ancestors, you receive your inheritance, okay? Not only your DNA, your eye color, your skin color, your genes, right? But your language, okay? Your values, your belief system, but also your belief system. Who is your God? See, you can't know God unless you know who the Creator is. See, because there's been an intervention in who we are, and we were taken away from culture, taken away from civilization, and given false images of who God is. You see? So now we have to have history, we have to have culture, we have to have science, and above all, this is where the Honorable Elijah Muhammad goes to another level, okay, even a higher level than Cheikh Anta. Cheikh Anta realized that we had to have new human and spiritual philosophy, but the Honorable Elijah Muhammad shows us how it must be done. See, Cheikh Anta raised up the history to find the ancestors, okay? And when you find the history of the ancestors, you have to know their culture, you see? But what Elijah did, excuse me for saying Elijah, but the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, he told us that we have to have proper education. And see, proper education, the question should be asked, what is proper education? And he said, education for the Negro, so-called Negro, must be beyond the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. But it must be the history of humanity, the history of black civilization, the knowledge of the universe, which must include all of the sciences, knowledge of all of the sciences, astronomy, physics, chemistry, oceanography, geology, biology, engineering, mathematics. All of these are sciences. And once you get these, you integrate them together, and this way you can find your place in the universe.
And how can this be answered mathematically?
Well, we have to go back, and we have to ask, how did life begin? And where did life begin? You see? And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us that life began from a single atom. And then he said that one atom produced the creator. Okay? And then that creator that was produced from that single atom represents the theory of something from nothing. See, mathematically, think about it. Okay? The theory of something from nothing. Because when you look at darkness, you think it's nothing, but in it is everything. When you were in your mother's womb, you were in vivo, in your mother's womb, you were in darkness, right? But when you came to the light, you had to desensitize yourself to the light. Okay? But now look at the majesty of that first being who came forward from that single atom of darkness, right? Remember, he was born in a sphere. So he created everything after him, the planets, the earth, the stuff, to reflect the milieu, the environment that he was born in. You see what I mean? Everything is spherical. But now look what he does. Now he puts himself in front of that sphere or that cipher that he was created in. You think that zero is nothing, but then he puts himself in front of that zero and it becomes what? 10. You see what I'm saying? So from 10, you have any number 10 to the 1 power, or say 0 to the 1. Any number to the 0 power is 1. Okay? And then that can become exponential. 10 to the second, 10 to the third, 10 to the fifth, etc., etc. So that's how life began to multiply.
What is the bridge between Africans in America or the diaspora and the continent itself? Because there was this image, this graphic of the hands reaching across and joining together as one. How can we, or why is that important? The oneness, the collective efforts across the Atlantic.
Right. This is a very, very good question. And this was a question that I remember that Cheikh Anta addressed. This was a follow-up to the question I asked him about I was asking him about the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, but I asked him about Dr. Freddie. And his response to me was that it is the duty and the right of every African in the diaspora to see and view themselves as Africans as much as it is for Africans who have remained in continental Africa. Because before we were separated, we have a common past. Our history, our culture was separated. But remember, we were taken away from culture and civilization, and we were shipped and disembarked in the Caribbean, Central, South America, and brought to America. But Cheikh Anta knew that the Africans who came to America has a specific role to play in this. And this is how he responded. He said he knew when he was in France and he was studying chemistry, he said he knew that the techniques that are in Africa, that are in America, they're not in places throughout the world. And he knew that the Africans in America would have a unique role to play in the resurrection of black people all over the world. And this is the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and this is what the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan has been saying, that we, the Africans who were enslaved in this country for 400 years, our language was taken away, our history was erased. We were socially debased, made to be a nigger, made to be colored and boogled, all of those social debasement. But because of that, the Creator has intervened on our behalf. And now He is raising us up to be the examples to the world. That is our duty. Just as the people who conquered us, they had a duty, and they did that. Now, among us, we have a duty, and now the world are waiting to see what we're going to do.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.